Welcome to this explainer. We are diving straight into what is honestly the ultimate magic trick of modern computing: how virtual worlds are generated in real time. When you fire up an interactive 3D simulation, you probably don't spend much time thinking about the staggering amount of mathematics happening just behind the glass of your screen. But beneath those gorgeous landscapes and lifelike characters is this frantic, highly orchestrated system designed to do exactly one thing perfectly: trick your brain. So today, we're unpacking the absolute genius techniques that engineers use to pull off this illusion, focusing specifically on how they handle visibility and lighting.
Here is our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with the quest for realism, then hiding the invisible, why shadows matter, computing the darkness, and finally, we'll go inside the GPU. Let's get right into it. Section 1. The quest for realism, and more specifically, the need for speed. To really grasp the immense challenge of computer graphics, we have to look at the massive gap between Hollywood magic and interactive virtual worlds. When a major studio makes an animated movie, they have literal server farms that can spend hours, sometimes entire days, calculating the precise physics of light for a single frame. But in an interactive application, we just don't have unbounded computing power. Real-time graphics require stage magicians pulling off split-second illusions to hit a bare minimum of 25 frames per second. That means the system has just milliseconds to draw the entire world from scratch, over and over and over again. Since true high-fidelity simulations of light are currently way too slow for real-time applications, developers face a pretty monumental hurdle. The holy grail here is photorealistic real-time rendering, right? But we can't get there just by throwing more raw horsepower at the problem. Instead, developers have to craft these highly efficient algorithms to use whatever power is available flawlessly. It's not just about doing the math faster, it's about figuring out how to completely avoid doing the math whenever possible.
Which brings us to Section 2, hiding the invisible, also known as occlusion culling.
So our first major illusion solves a really practical question. Why on earth would we waste math on things the camera can't even see? In older or simpler setups, rendering systems process every single primitive in a scene. If you're standing in a massive virtual city, your camera's field of view, that green pyramid shape you see, which we call the view frustum, intersects with thousands of buildings. But if you're standing on the street level in a dense block, most of those buildings are completely hidden behind the ones directly in front of you. Processing the geometry of some skyscraper 3 blocks away that is totally blocked from your view is a massive waste of precious resources.
The crucial point here is we need a way to mathematically delete the invisible parts of the set before they ever reach your screen. This is where a visibility algorithm called occlusion culling comes in. It's essentially a way to force the computer to be aggressively lazy. It rapidly tests the scene to figure out what is blocked or occluded by other objects. If something is hidden, the system just drops it. It completely skips the lighting, the texturing, and the drawing phases for that entire object. And the visual proof of just how effective this is? It's undeniable. Look at the wireframe city block, where the computer is forced to think about every single structural triangle, regardless of whether it's hidden behind the front row of buildings. It's this tangled, dense mess of data. But then, look at what happens when occlusion culling is enabled. The algorithm has essentially dropped the hidden buildings right off its to-do list. The rendering workload here is reduced approximately 100-fold. And this invisible deletion is happening dozens of times a second as you move through a virtual world.
Okay, Section 3. Why shadows matter and how they anchor the illusion.
Having successfully hidden all that invisible geometry to save our rendering budget, we now have to light what's left over. Now you might be thinking, hey, if we're so desperate to save computing power, why not just skip shadows entirely? And fair enough, early 3D graphics totally did. But if we omit shadows, we run into a massive issue with how the human brain interprets spatial relationships. Without them, the image just breaks down into flat, confusing geometry.
Without shadows, complete visual ambiguity takes over. Just look at the red and yellow balls. When there are no shadows, they appear to be resting identically on that gray surface, right? They look exactly the same in terms of depth and height. But the second you add shadows, boom, your brain instantly understands their true position in space. The red ball is actually resting directly on the surface, while the yellow ball is floating in the air closer to you. Shadows aren't just there to make things look pretty or dramatic. They're absolutely fundamental data points your brain uses to understand the 3D reality being simulated. Now, here's something wild. The underlying geometry of shadow generation, not a new concept at all.
It was mathematically mapped out 500 years ago by the school of Leonardo da Vinci. Da Vinci completely understood that you could project lines from a light source past an object's silhouette to find exactly where the shadow falls. So the geometric theory has been there for centuries, but having the raw computational power to calculate those projections for millions of tiny triangles in real time, that is a purely modern invention.
Moving into Section 4, Computing the Darkness, where we compare volumes versus maps.
So how exactly do engineers compute these mathematically perfect areas of darkness on the fly? One incredibly accurate technique is called shadow volumes. This algorithm literally builds a 3D shape of the dark space hidden from a light source, and it works in 3 exact steps. First, it defines the light cap. That's the shadow casting object itself. Second, it extrudes side quads directly outward from the silhouette edges of that object, stretching away from the light. And third, it caps the far end of this invisible tube with a dark cap. To figure out if a pixel on your screen is in shadow, the system uses this deliberate depth testing method called Z-fail, Z representing depth in 3D space. It essentially counts how many times an invisible line drawn from your camera enters and exits this 3D volume of darkness. If the line enters the volume more times than it exits, well, that pixel is in shadow.
But computing the darkness is never perfect. Engineers basically have to pick their poison here. Shadow volumes give geometrically perfect edges with 0 blocky pixels. The weakness? They completely choke the system's fill rate. It drastically slows down how fast pixels can be drawn because tracking those massive invisible 3D tubes eats up huge amounts of memory bandwidth. On the flip side, we have shadow maps. Shadow maps essentially take a quick snapshot of the scene from the perspective of the light source to see what is lit and what is blocked. They are way simpler and faster. But the downside? They suffer from jagged, pixelated boundaries and weird visual errors called self-shadowing artifacts that can totally break the illusion if they aren't heavily optimized.
Finally, Section 5. Inside the GPU, looking at hardware illusions.
To really understand why algorithms like occlusion culling hit a bottleneck, we have to pop the hood and look directly inside the engine running the whole show, the GPU itself. Modern GPUs are absolute marvels, but they have a very rigid pipeline. They take data in and push it out in a super strict sequence. To speed things up, they use specialized on-chip caches that track the minimum and maximum depth values of objects, what we call Z-min and Z-max. This allows for early occlusion tests. Basically, the hardware checks these caches to quickly figure out if a cluster of pixels is hidden behind something else. If it is, it skips over those hidden pixels before doing the heavy math of shading and texturing them. But there's a catch. This hardware optimization only works efficiently if the 3D shapes are fed into the GPU system in a very specific front-to-back order. If the system feeds the background objects in first, the GPU ends up drawing them, only to overwrite them later when the foreground objects finally arrive.
So, to fix this rigid pipeline problem, engineers developed a concept called delay streams. Think of delay streams as the ultimate backstage manager at a theater. Instead of just letting the GPU process everything in whatever random order it arrives, delay streams act as a buffer. They hold back the processing of certain elements, reordering the primitives right there on the hardware to ensure things are rendered perfectly. This ensures that tricky elements like semi-transparent surfaces that you have to be able to see through and shadows are layered with perfect efficiency, drastically reducing all that wasted pixel processing overhead. So what is the ultimate takeaway from all this? As our source material highlights, more efficient algorithms for occlusion culling and shadows are absolutely vital steps toward larger, more realistic virtual environments. When we talk about better graphics, we tend to focus entirely on processor speeds or how much memory a graphics card has. But ultimately, it's these invisible mathematical tricks, the algorithms that call the unseen, project the darkness, and manipulate the very flow of data inside the GPU that are exactly what allow us to explore the vast, breathtaking digital worlds we love today.
Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating thought to end on. If modern algorithms are already smart enough to mathematically delete entirely unseen cities 100 times a second just to render your specific view, what impossible illusions will the next generation of GPUs make real? As our tricks for cheating the system get more and more sophisticated, it really leaves you wondering just how deep the illusion goes, doesn't it? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep your eyes open the next time you step into a virtual world. You are literally looking at a masterpiece of invisible math.